On behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, it is indeed my pleasure and my privilege to welcome you all here this morning, and more particularly to all of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are following us via both radio and television, live broadcast via the internet. Under the leadership of the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, and the Honourable Minister of Energy, Senator Franklin Khan, this is indeed a welcome initiative. And this is indeed, as we see it, a momentous occasion and a historical moment for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Because what we intend to do today as your government, along and ably assisted with a number of panelists and presenters, is present in the first time in a very open and transparent manner the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago. Everyone in Trinidad and Tobago, and also globally, knows that the lifeblood of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has been an oil and gas economy, and that we can take a great pride as Trinidadian citizens in knowing that we are as good as anywhere else in the world, and in fact, in some areas, we have actually led globally in the type of downstream industry that exists in Trinidad and Tobago, that vision taken many years ago, and also the use of natural gas that not so long ago was a flared resource. So today, the government is going to lay bare the facts associated with this very important global industry where we compete globally. And we're going to have a very open and frank conversation with those in the room, and beginning with the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and letting you know that under our stewardship, what has been done and what is intended to be done to ensure the future of Trinidad and Tobago for the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago. So welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today in what we think is an extremely important moment for Trinidad and Tobago going forward. And who better than to lead the discussions and to inform us as to what was met, what existed historically, what we've been doing, and what we intend to do going forward, than our Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, Senator the Honourable Franklin Khan. As you are all aware, and it needs very little introduction, Mr. Khan is a petroleum geologist by profession, having spent 20 years in the energy sector, both locally and abroad, in a broad range of positions, both at the technical and managerial levels. He holds a BSc degree in geology and geography in 1980 from UWI Mona, Jamaica, and an MBA from the Arthur Lockjack School of Business. Professionally, Mr. Khan has served as the president of the Geological Society of Trinidad and Tobago on 2 occasions. He also served as a director of the Water and Sewerage Authority between 1986 and 1990, and as chairman of the National Petroleum Marketing Company from 2001 to 2002. In public life, he was elected as a member of parliament for Ottawa Mayaro in 2002 and served as Minister of Works and Transport under the Manning administration. In 2011, Mr. Khan was elected the chairman of the People's National Movement, and together with our political leader, the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, led our party to victory in 2015. Mr. Khan currently holds the following 3 key public offices: the chairman of the People's National Movement, leader of government business in the Senate, and this morning he will address us as the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. I ask that you welcome Minister Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, the Honourable Stuart Young, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister. Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honourable Dr. Keith Rowley, other Cabinet Ministers, members of parliament, both from the upper and the lower houses, permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries, members of the diplomatic corps, mayors and chairmen of municipal corporations and regional corporations, energy sector executives and energy stakeholders, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. This is the first public account of the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago. It comes on the heels of our successful spotlight presented on the economy, which was a pre-budget presentation. In keeping with the theme, our oil, our gas, our future, my address will cover the state of the industry, the challenges, and the future from a government perspective. The presenters who will follow are Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy, Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Vishnu Dhanpaul, Mr. Anthony Paul, Chairman of the Local Content Committee, and Mr. Graham Hartnell and Mr. Grammy Wild Goose of Poten and Partners, who are the authors of the Natural Gas Master Plan, and they will provide a more in-depth account of the specific areas within their purview and area of expertise. The ultimate objective is to provide to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the resource owner, an account of the stewardship of the sector and the plans for the future. The underlying theme of the presentation, as Minister Young indicated, is that Trinidad and Tobago continues to be a viable oil and gas province. This is evidenced by our upstream stakeholders, who, in the case of BPTT and Shell, are among the top 5 oil and gas producing companies in the world. Other companies such as BHP, EOG Resources, and Perenco are highly regarded in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, when this administration took office in September of 2015, the industry was saddled with a number of challenges and uncertainties. There was declining production, both in oil and gas, low levels of investment, outstanding contract negotiations to be concluded for the supply of gas with both upstream and downstream companies, and major claims on the NGC. As a responsible government, we took immediate steps to address these issues by effecting the following. On assuming office, the first thing the Prime Minister did was the reactivation of the Cabinet Standing Committee on Energy, chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister himself. We established a subcommittee of the Standing Committee on Energy, the Energy Task Force as it is called, which is headed by former Minister of Finance, Mr. Wendell Motley. And I must say they have been doing human service to Trinidad and Tobago over this period. We were in receipt of the Poten and Partners Gas Master Plan report in September of 2015. We appointed a Lashley committee on the restructuring of Petroleum in February 2017. We brokered, through the Honorable Prime Minister, firm gas supply commitments from upstream producers BPTT and EOG at the famous Houston meetings in April 2017. We issued a mandate to the restructured Petroleum Board of Directors to return the company to viability, pursuant to the Lashley report submitted on June 3, 2017. For the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, we laid the Gas Master Plan report in Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, that document is now a public document. Very large to read, but it's still a public document. Continuous action by the NGC to settle outstanding downstream claims. And lastly, we re-established the Permanent Petroleum Pricing Committee. Let me start with the good news. Upstream activity. The upstream companies have committed to spend over $10 billion in exploration and development activities over the next 5 years. The positive effect of such investment is already being realized. In December 2017, that's December last year, natural gas production, which had fallen to 3.2 billion cubic feet per day, had reached a daily production in December last year of 3.8 billion cubic feet a day, the highest since 2011. Given the investment commitments by the upstream, the gas shortage or curtailment, as it is normally called, that has been a negative feature of the industry operations for the last 7 years will now be minimized, if not completely eliminated. These investments include BP's Angelin project, which is due to come on stream in the first quarter of 2019 and will provide in excess of 550 million cubic feet per day. The Renewable project, which is due to come on stream first quarter of 2019 also, with 60 million cubic feet per day. Other imminent projects are the East Coast and Northeast Coast development projects of Shell, such as Starfish, Dolphin, Dolphin Deep, Endeavour, and Bounty fields on the East Coast, and Castro and Orchid on the Northeast Coast. There will be phased development of these fields over 2018 to 2019, with first gas coming from Starfish in the second quarter of 2018. EOG Resources have also indicated its intent to pursue over the period 2018 to 2022 exploration and development activities in its SECC block, and with a joint venture with BP on the deep horizons of the TSP block. BHP will be pursuing development activities on its Block 3A. There are also proven gas fields such as the Venezuelan Dragon field and the cross-border fields with Venezuela, Loren Manatee, Capoc Dorado, and Manikin Coquina, for which development plans are currently being worked on and from which gas will be available in the next 2 to 3 years. The picture would not be complete without mention of recent gas finds of approximately 7 trillion cubic feet. BPTT recently announced the discovery of 2 TCF of natural gas in Savannah and Macadamia fields in its acreage on the southeast coast. These discoveries, and I speak as a geologist here now, put to rest any lingering doubt on the continued prospectivity of the shallow and near-shore areas, which have been the location of past major discoveries. New technological innovations, such as ocean bottom cable survey, has given new lease on life on these areas and has confirmed the assertion of eminent geologists, both locally and internationally, that significant quantities of oil and gas are yet to be found. BHP has also announced a natural gas discovery in Block 5 in our deepwater area on the East Coast. Preliminary indications are that the find ranges between 5 and 10 trillion cubic feet, and there's also evidence that the block possesses oil. In the coming months, exploration activity will be conducted by BHP in Blocks 5, 14, and 29 in our deepwater area. In all, in 2018, 9 exploration wells are to be drilled, and these include 3 in the deepwater. In a regional context, the Caribbean region has become the focus of oil and gas companies in their quest for new hydrocarbon reserves. There was a time Trinidad was the sole player in CARICOM in oil and gas. Success in exploration, everybody knows the deepwater area of Guyana has stimulated interest in other countries. There are currently exploration activities being conducted in Suriname, Cuba, Barbados, Grenada, and Guyana. This provides opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago in all aspects of the oil and gas value chain. I intend to lead the charge in a new, what we call the Caribbean energy diplomacy in the coming months. Let me move on now to our oil and gas resources. Ladies and gentlemen, exploration activity is a costly and risky business. The cost of drilling an exploration well in deep water runs into tens of millions of US dollars, and development costs are in the US billion-dollar range. Therefore, and listen to me carefully, energy companies expect to realize a fair rate of return on their investment, and rightly so. Concomitantly, however, the resource owner, that is the state, as the resource owner, has a sovereign right to extract a fair economic rent on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I'll repeat that. Indeed, I will go further to state unequivocally that the state, as the resource owner, has a sovereign right to extract a fair economic rent on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Our 3P gas reserves, based on the last Scott report audit, was 22.7 TCF, and gas resources were estimated at 43.7 TCF. The audit information does not include gas finds of the BHP discovery in the deepwater blocks, which is estimated at 5 TCF, nor the BP Savannah and Macadamia fields of 2 TCF. Our gas reserves are consumed at a rate of approximately 3.5 BCF per day, or 1.2 to 1.4 TCF per annum. The current gas utilization of 3.5 BCF is apportioned between LNG 60% and the downstream industries, including power generation of 40%. Between 2018 and 2019, most of the gas contracts between NGC, the aggregator of gas for the downstream industry, and the upstream companies expired, and likewise the petrochemical companies. Yet, it was only when the new board of the NGC was appointed by this government that negotiations for new gas contracts commenced with the upstream companies. This dereliction of its responsibility by the former NGC board, and by extension the then government, put the future of the petrochemical industry at risk, and also placed this government in a disadvantageous negotiating position. The situation required the intervention of the Honorable Prime Minister, who in April 2017 met with senior executives of BPTT and EOG at the now famous Houston meeting, at which gas supply issues were resolved. Discussions with Shell are ongoing, and a favorable outcome is expected. Gas supply arrangements are already in place with BHP. Ladies and gentlemen, I now move on to economic rent. Data from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and the Ministry of Finance reveal that taxes and royalties collected from the sector have been on a diminishing trend. Mr. Vishnu Dhanpaul will articulate that in greater detail. Energy sector revenue, which peaked at 28 billion TT dollars in 2008, fell to a staggeringly low figure of 1 billion TT dollars in 2017. Falling energy prices may account in part for the reduction in revenue. Oil prices, which averaged $97 per barrel in 2008, averaged $54 a barrel in 2017. Henry Hub gas prices, on which most contracts are based, fell from $9 per MMBTU to $3 per MMBTU. The fall in energy prices and declining production, as significant as they were, in our humble opinion, could not be solely responsible for the precipitous fall in revenue. Let me repeat that. The fall in energy prices and decline in production, as significant as they were, could not be solely responsible for the precipitous fall in revenue. And I continue. A survey of other oil and gas producing countries was undertaken to ascertain whether our experience was shared. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not the case. The research indicated that we are singular in this matter. I want to repeat again. The research indicated that we are singular in this matter. In one example, whereas the upstream company in that other jurisdiction paid taxes of US $3.6 billion, or 53% of its gross revenue of $6.8 billion, that very said company paid only US $31 million US dollars, or 0.6% in taxes on its gross revenue of $5.3 billion in Trinidad and Tobago. A comparative analysis of Trinidad and Tobago's competitiveness showed that Trinidad and Tobago is in the median range with respect to fiscal incentives, and the rate of return achieved by investors was among the highest in oil and gas economies. Also of immense concern is the fact that while the Minister of Finance is challenged by revenue collection, upstream companies holding substantial assets in Trinidad and Tobago are at this time recording record profits. State-owned Petroleum, ladies and gentlemen, is also complicit in the underpayment of revenue due to the government. Petroleum, which produces 60% of the country's crude oil, has been withholding payment due to its financial challenges and other financial obligations. As of December 31st, 2017, the company owed the government approximately $2 billion TT dollars in taxes and royalties. With current prices averaging $60 US per barrel for oil, the debt continues to accrue at a staggering $70 million TT dollars per month, without any indication by Petroleum of any forthcoming payments. Obviously, this is an unacceptable position which the Board of Directors has been requested to address. Let me clear up another misconception. Most people in this country feel that when oil prices are high, things nice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer the case. Our oil production is now significantly lower than in the past. And because of Petroleum's inability to meet its commitment to the exchequer, the situation is compounded. There's a further issue. The increase in oil prices has resulted in a fuel subsidy liability to government. Based on the budgeted oil price of $52 per barrel and the increase in fuel prices, government was not liable to payment of a subsidy. However, crude oil prices are averaging over $60 per barrel. As at February 2018, the subsidy liability was TT 326 million and is estimated to increase to 950 million TT by the end of fiscal year 2018. Government's liability is estimated to be 650 million, with a balance of 300 million being met through the petroleum levy. In the 2018 budget, it was decided that the Ministry of Energy would publish on a monthly basis the wholesale and retail product prices of liquid petroleum fuels based on prevailing crude oil prices to maintain a zero subsidy to the government. The Ministry of Energy is currently working on the legal and other arrangement to effect this decision. I now move on to the meat of this presentation, the Gas Master Plan report. Ladies and gentlemen, Poten and partners, the authors of the report, in its Gas Master Plan, advised that Trinidad and Tobago was systematically being denied of its revenue entitlement. Those are powerful words. They deduced that commercial and contractual structures of the Atlantic LNG trains had been such that little of the benefits of high global LNG prices had flowed back to the government of Trinidad and Tobago in the period under review, 2010 to 2014. This was because the the low weighted average netback price for LNG in Trinidad and Tobago under commercial arrangements was inconsistent with the high prices of LNG prevailing in the global market. It has been estimated by Poten that the country would have lost up to $6 billion annually from such transfer pricing practices for the period 2010 to 2014. These are staggering numbers. And we didn't invent it, An independent consultant came up with that. This is not an understatement, as the Ministry of Energy has recorded instances where the netback prices for LNG sales have been negative. In such instances, ladies and gentlemen, it is tantamount to paying the companies for the utilization of your own natural gas resources. Poten and partners have indicated that at current prices, Trinidad continues to lose up to $1.5 billion annually. In the Gas Master Plan report, it was noted that over the period 2009 to 2014, petrochemical netback prices were significantly higher than the netback prices for LNG. In 2014, LNG realized a netback price of $3.32 per MMBTU, compared to a methanol netback price of $4.80 per MMBTU, and an ammonia netback price of a staggering $6 per MMBTU. The position is unchanged, as according to the Ministry of Energy's records, the netback LNG prices for the period 2015 to 2017 are at least $1 US per MMBTU less than prices received from petrochemicals. Notwithstanding the super profits achieved by the upstream companies, they maintain that they share a disproportionate share of the rewards from the level of risk they take. In their view, the maturity of Trinidad and Tobago as a hydrocarbon province has been occasioned by greater subsurface and geological risk without the commensurate reward. In their opinion, NGC and the downstream companies have benefited disproportionately in the returns accrued to the sector. This is their view. This, in their view, is compounded by the arbitrary tax reviews by the Board of Inland Revenue and the subsidized gas for tea and tech for power generation. In the final analysis, their position is that unless the reward matches the risk, there will be reduced investment in upstream and consequently less gas. The upstream company's position with respect to return on investment is at odds with findings in studies commissioned by the Ministry of Energy of the competitiveness of Trinidad and Tobago as a hydrocarbon province. The past studies have shown that Trinidad and Tobago has consistently had the higher rates of investment return compared with other jurisdictions such as Colombia, Ghana, Brazil, and Norway. Given their demand, recent gas contracts with upstream companies have been at significantly higher prices. These prices pose a challenge to both the NGC and the downstream companies for obvious reasons. You buy at X, you must sell at X plus. The situation is compounded by the preference of upstream companies to provide gas for LNG rather than the downstream industries, even though I just articulated to you that the netback on petrochemicals is higher than LNG. As a consequence, the future of our downstream industry is now being jeopardized. The government is acutely aware of the situation, and ladies and gentlemen, will not allow our downstream industry to fold up. We are currently reviewing our options, which may include a gas allocation policy to ensure the sustainability of our downstream industries. I now move on to transfer pricing. Poten and partners have determined that transfer pricing is the main cause for the underreporting of revenue by energy companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, very powerful statement. They further determined that transfer pricing was endemic in Atlantic transactions. They said it, you know. They further determined that transfer pricing was endemic in Atlantic transactions. In the case of LNG, the absence of clarity and precision in the existing long-term contractual and commercial arrangements has severely compromised the value received by Trinidad and Tobago for LNG sold by the 4 Atlantic LNG trains in marketing arrangements to either related parties of the owners of the trains to either related parties of the owners of the trains or to other marketing agents. In addition, deficiencies in the current tax laws and the current contracts provide opportunities for reduced taxation in Trinidad and Tobago. Review of the fiscal regime. In order to positively rebalance this unacceptable situation, the government is taking a comprehensive review of the contribution available from the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago. In 2018 budget, the Minister of Finance introduced changes in the royalty system, which increased the royalty rate to 12.5% on oil and gas revenue. Prior to this adjustment, the royalty on gas, ladies and gentlemen, was as low as 0.01% in some instances. 0.01 is 1/100 of 1%. The net impact of the adjustment of the royalty rate is an increase in royalty payments, hopefully from TT 1 billion in 2017 to in excess of TT 3 billion in 2018. The first royalty payment on gas is due at the end of March 2018. That's the end of this month. I must add that this royalty payment is to be borne by the upstream companies and should not be passed on to the NGC nor the downstream sector. The Ministry of Finance is also reviewing changes in the taxation system to improve government takes from the revenue earned from oil and gas operations in this country. One such review is in respect of allowances granted to upstream companies as a deduction from revenue. In 2014, the then government agreed to the grant of accelerated allowances, which entitled companies to write down costs against revenue over a period of 3 years as compared to the original proposal of 5 years. As a consequence, recent upstream developments, while contributing significantly to oil and gas production, has impacted disproportionately on government's take from the sector. Ladies and gentlemen, given the magnitude of cross-border transactions and transactions between related parties, the introduction of transfer pricing rules and mechanisms is being expedited. The existing tax laws of Trinidad and Tobago include generic anti-avoidance provision, which encapsulates the arm's length principle. However, there are deficiencies of the tax laws as they relate to artificial and non-arm's length transactions, which challenge and limit the tax authorities in the implementation of these laws. These are currently being addressed. Parallel steps are being taken to strengthen the public institution with the responsibility for the administration of these areas. In this regard, there has been a reactivation of the Permanent Petroleum Pricing Committee, which is the mechanism through which the Minister of Finance establishes a fair market value for the disposal of petroleum and petrochemical products. The determination of the fair market price will allow the Board of Inland Revenue to recoup taxes that are underreported. Let me now deal with, penultimately, a review of the LNG marketing arrangements. Poten and partners, again, have identified the LNG trains as the avenue of the largest leakage of revenue from Trinidad and Tobago. Excuse me for repeating so often, but let me say that again. Poten and partners have identified the LNG trains as the largest, as the avenue of the largest leakage of revenue from Trinidad and Tobago. The 4 LNG trains, Train 1, which began operation in 1998, Trains 2 and 3 in 2002 and 2003 respectively, and Trains 4 in 2005. Train 1, ladies and gentlemen, is a merchant train in that Atlantic buys and takes title of the natural gas from BPTT and converts it to LNG and NGLs and sell these products. The LNG is sold under 2 20-year LNG sales agreements with off-takers that have no nexus at all with Trinidad and Tobago. In the mid-2000s, subsequent on the intervention by government that this country was not receiving the benefits of diversion to higher price markets, the contract went to arbitration, which resulted in a revision of the price formula. The outcome was not favorable to Trinidad and Tobago and resulted in a significant erosion to value flowing back to Atlantic Train 1. Poten and partners, again, have estimated that the value lost to Trinidad and Tobago as at least $1.4 billion per annum from 2011 to 2013 on Atlantic Train 1 alone. Trains 2 and 3 are quasi-tolling facilities. Atlantic buys and takes title of the natural gas supplied by BPTT and Shell, which is converted to LNG and NGLs at a fee charged by the plant. These products are sold by the company, and the value of the LNG is passed back upstream. While Atlantic is a party to and administers the contract, the upstream companies and marketing companies have the right to participate in negotiations and approve any adjustment to the pricing provisions of the contract. Some contracts provide for the sharing of upsides. In others, there is no sharing. Train 4 is a pure tolling arrangement. The shareholdings are BPTT 37.8%, Shell 51.1%, and NGC 11.1%. The gas supply LNG offtake mirrors the shareholding in the train, with Shell buying gas upstream from BPTT and NGC buying gas from BPTT and EOG. The offtake arrangements for BPTT and Shell involve FOB sales to the downstream marketing affiliates, with price based on indexation to Henry Hub adjusted for the location of the buyer's specific terminal capacity in the US. In principle, there is sharing of the upside in diversion. The Atlantic off-takers have taken full advantage of the terms of their contracts to employ marketing strategies to improve their revenue position to the detriment of this country. Poten and partners have highlighted the case of Shell, which following the acquisition of BG and Repsol, LNG's interests, began to take supplies of Train 2-3 volumes in lieu of Train 4 volumes to higher value markets, as it does not have a shared upside diversion revenue realized. For Train 4 contracts, which has a sharing of upside, these volumes are being supplied to low value markets. Objections raised by the Ministry of Energy to the diversion by Shell have been ignored by the company. An analysis of the marketing arrangement revealed that there is no transparency in the execution of contracts. The marketing companies interpret contract provisions to their own benefit, and the lack of audit rights by the government limits its ability to determine contract violations. In addition, several of the marker prices which govern LNG sales from Atlantic are tied to US Henry Hub prices, which has been depressed and as a result have impacted negatively on revenue derived from LNG. So much so, as I said earlier, that in extreme cases in Train 4, there have been negative upstream netbacks, while the marketing companies are achieving positive margin offshore of Trinidad's jurisdiction. Ladies and gentlemen, The government finds the situation with the LNG marketing arrangements to be untenable, in that significant revenues are flowing offshore while the government is facing severe revenue shortfalls. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say this morning. This administration plans to deal frontally and decisively with these matters. In that regard, the government has returned the services of Poten and partners as a continuation of their gas master plan. And we have engaged the international energy law firm of White and Chase out of New York to advise the government on these matters. As a consequence, the government has communicated to the upstream companies and their affiliates that the status quo in relation to LNG marketing arrangements cannot be maintained, and a new framework that is beneficial to Trinidad and Tobago will have to be instituted. I was wondering when I was going to clap. The dialogue between the companies and the government have already been initiated. In particular, discussions currently are ongoing on the future of Atlantic Train 1, as that contract expires in the third quarter of 2018. Atlantic Trains 2, 3, and 4 expires in 2022, 2023, and 2027, respectively. Notwithstanding, the government is seeking to review terms of the marketing arrangement of their contracts to improve the revenue stream to Trinidad and Tobago. And penultimately, let me say a few words on local content. The oil and gas sector is a very capital-intensive industry. The $10 billion projected to spend by upstream companies will be on substantially capital goods, such as rigs, subsea equipment, seismic equipment, platforms, turbines, and pipe. All such equipment, with the exception of platform fabrication, cannot be built in this country. We have established at Labray a world-class fabrication yard, which is a joint venture between Wellfab, a local company, and Chet Morrison Contractors of the United States. The joint venture company, TOFCO, has built 9 offshore platforms for upstream companies over the period 2005 to 2017. Yet the procurement of the local fabrication business by TOFCO is not guaranteed and often requires intervention of the government. It is apparent that the upstream companies, despite their overt promotion, are not entirely committed to the development of the local industries. We have come to the realization that the 2004 local content and local participation framework and policy is ineffective, outdated, and needs to be urgently reviewed. Accordingly, the government will be reconstituting and strengthening the Permanent Local Content Committee to review the local content policies and guidelines. Also, the employment record of upstream companies also leave much to be desired. As indicated by Poten and partners, the companies have been making super profits. Yet, there has been a continuous downsizing by companies which have thrown experienced local professionals on the breadline and have denied opportunities to our young energy sector graduates. It's something I feel very strongly about. Over the period 2014 to 2017, there was a reduction of 33% of the workforce employed in the sector. We have also recognized that the work permit procedures and systems are not rigorously implemented, and that companies ignore the requirements for participation of our nationals. An overhaul of the system will be undertaken, and the conditions attached to work permits will be strictly enforced. And finally, no energy discussion in the 21st century is complete without something said about renewables. Pursuant to its commitment to the global environment, on February 22, 2018, the government of Trinidad and Tobago deposited its instrument of ratification of the Paris Agreement, confirming its pledge to assist in the reduction of greenhouse emissions. By this act, which is a formal commitment, the country can now be held accountable for its climate change targets, if its climate change targets are not met. Power generation, transportation, and industrial sectors are the main emitters of greenhouse gases. Accordingly, a carbon reduction strategy has been developed for these sectors. Arising from this strategy, it is proposed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 15% and public transport emissions by 30% by December 2030. With regards to power generation, we have set a target of 10% renewable power generation by 2021. The peak demand in Trinidad and Tobago is currently 1,371 megawatts and a total contracted capacity of 1,758 megawatts. By 2021, peak system demand is projected to be 1,496 megawatts. This means that 149 megawatts of installed capacity from renewable sources will have to be provided to meet that 10% target. In pursuant of this objective, expression of interest have been invited for utility-scale renewable projects for grid integration and for the development of a waste-to-energy facility at the Beetham landfill for the conversion of municipal waste to power generation. Currently, ladies and gentlemen, 99.8% of power generation is fueled by natural gas. TNTEC acquires the gas from NGC for conversions by the power generation companies, which are Trinity, PowerGen, and TGU, into electricity, which is transmitted through the TNTEC network. TNTEC's financial position has been challenging, and the Commission has only been able to stay afloat by deferring payments, especially gas payments to the NGC, which currently amounts to a staggering $654 million US. In order to mitigate the gas cost to TNTEC, the government will be pursuing the establishment of a power tranche of gas among all the upstream companies at a negotiated gas cost. At present, BPTT provides a tranche of 100 million cubic feet per day out of TNTEC's current requirement of 260 million cubic feet per day. It is proposed to make the power tranche mandatory for all companies. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to assure the national community that the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago is resilient, viable, and despite recent challenges, will maintain and strengthen its position as the main driver of the economy. The technology and innovations that have been developed for the industry, such as ocean bottom cable surveys, have brought a new dimension to oil and gas exploration. This has created a new impetus to oil and gas exploration in Trinidad and Tobago. We propose to seize on this moment by making available new acreage for exploration. In this regard, the Ministry of Energy is currently finalizing a new competitive bid round comprising blocks in shallow and moderately deep water. Based on the nominations by companies, we are confident in the prospectivity of the acreage to be put on offer. In moving forward, steps will be taken to ensure that the country receives an optimum value for the monetization of oil and gas. The establishment of a royalty rate of 12.5% across the board was the first fiscal adjustment that are being proposed. This issue, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, will require legislative modification to existing legislation, but more importantly, honest and frank renegotiations of contracts with the relevant companies. Let me repeat that. More importantly, honest and frank renegotiations of contracts with the relevant companies. However, I am pleased to add that there is a clear indication that the companies are prepared to discuss these matters, and hopefully, as matured stakeholders, we can arrive at an amicable settlement with all the parties. Because the ultimate objective, ladies and gentlemen, is the right of the resource owner, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to a fair economic rent for what are wasting assets. And this should be respected and honored. The recent past has been challenging. It has been a challenging period for the industry. We believe, however, that we are progressively turning around the situation and that a more secure and promising future lies ahead. Before I say thank you, ladies and gentlemen, I know I've said a lot. I want you to ponder what I have delivered here today. Let us continue the discussions along those lines for the rest of the day. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Khan. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, today's theme could not say it more appropriately. Indeed, it is our oil, our gas, and our future, the our referring to every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. This government gives an assurance that one of the areas it is completely committed to, no pun intended, expending a lot of energy in and being led none other than by the Prime Minister, is the energy sector, and understanding that these are depleting resources, that is our oil and gas, and we are determined as an administration and as a government to extract the maximum benefit for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. You would have heard Minister Khan touch on the power tranching, because as we see it, all of these molecules of gas belong to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and one of the ways citizens can get direct benefit is from the subsidized electricity rates. So as a government, we remain committed to ensuring that these contracts are renegotiated with the simple mantra being maximum benefit to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And without further ado, we will now be inviting the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, P.S. Selwyn Lashley, to come and inform us as to what has been happening at the Ministry of Energy and what is going to be happening as we move forward into the future. Please welcome P.S. Selwyn Lashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all. Dr. Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Senator the Honorable Franklin Khan, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, other government ministers in attendance, members of Parliament, all other protocols honored, adopted, and observed. After such an overwhelming presentation by Minister Khan, a lot of what I have to say, I will not say, because he has said it already. However, I think it's always useful in fora like these to reflect a bit on some of the very illustrious history that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. We've been in the oil business for over 100 years. And in fact, a lot of our experiences have been used as the model adopted by other jurisdictions in terms of how they progress their energy development. So without further ado, let me just run through my slides. I will go rather quickly because of time constraints. But I just want to focus on about 4 issues that I think are extremely important as we go forward. Now, in terms of the industry and its importance to Trinidad and Tobago, most of us are aware in terms of our current economic situation, the GDP, our current GDP of about 150 million TT, GDP per capita of approximately 16,000 US. The contribution of energy to GDP is approximately 32%. It used to be higher, but certainly as we are based on energy prices in 2017, that's the sort of contribution. Inflation rate, 1.3%. That's the headline inflation. Unemployment is only 4.5%. And the energy sector, notwithstanding its importance, is really a small contributor to employment. It's 2.4%. Small but significant because the energy sector jobs are highly qualified, highly skilled jobs. And in terms of an area for employment, high-value employment for nationals, it has always been and continues to be an area that nationals would gravitate to. In terms of our contribution to foreign exchange, or foreign exchange contributions, the number is not up there, but 4.2 billion US in 2017, and the contribution to foreign direct investment is always significant in the energy sector, 58%. The key energy production statistics as put up there, I won't dwell on them, but certainly the crude oil production in 2017 of 71,824 barrels per day, and oil refining throughput of approximately 135,000 barrels per day. And certainly in terms of ammonia and methanol production, I'll return to that later. Notwithstanding the current challenges experienced with gas production in 2017 and exports of ammonia and methanol actually improved from 2016 to 2017. The structure of the industry, we're all familiar with, the upstream suppliers. There's a mix of suppliers, big players, and we are introducing a number of smaller players as we go along, as we seek to explore marginal fields and introduce more gas in the mix. In the midstream, we have the very important role played by the NGC, and you hear a lot more about that later, and the NGC group, which includes Phoenix Park. And on the downstream end, there's a mix of downstream users, petrochemicals, heavy metals, light industry, and of course, LNG and power. The assets are well established in terms of the supply and production facilities of the East Coast and in the North Coast Marine area. A network of pipelines adequately and managed by the NGC for the most part, and most of the production facilities located on the West Coast, at Point Lisas, down at Point Poten with Atlantic LNG, and recently and in the future, the emerging complex at Union Estate, where there's the new plant being constructed by Mitsubishi and their co-ventures. Our legislative framework is well established. I've listed here some of the laws, the applicable laws that apply to, primarily in this case, the upstream, upstream, midstream, and downstream in the sector. But what I want to say on that is this framework has always been a framework that has been flexible in terms of the introduction of incentives, in terms of responding to the requirements of stakeholders. And in fact, we continue to have a legislative framework that's reliable, that's stable, and at the same time, flexible. One of the latest examples, actually, of that flexibility has come in with the recent introduction of a 12.5% royalty across the board on both oil and natural gas. And in fact, the figures show here that based on the declining returns of royalties, by introducing this measure, we forecast that in 2015, we will be realizing significant improvement in the royalty take from natural gas. You'll hear a lot more about this from P.S. Dhanpaul, who will deal with some of the finances coming in from the sector. The history of the sector is one dating back to 1908, and the sector has moved from one of being a principally oil-based sector to one that has transformed into gas. And this slide is going to get the crude oil and condensate reserves based on the last reserve audit. And the reserve audits for crude oil, for liquid petroleum, are done every 4 years. So the last audit, as at the end of 2011, put our oil reserves at the 3P at 409.77. The condensate reserves are derived from the audit of the natural gas reserves because condensate is produced in association with gas, and that's at 98.67. As we speak, the audit of the natural gas reserves for 2016 and 2017 is currently underway. We went out with a tender last year, and based on that tender, the successful company is again Ryder Scott Company of Houston, Texas. They are currently in country right now, meeting with the companies and ensuring that at the end of the day we'll have an independent certification of our reserves. As you can see, the reserves have moved over the years, but certainly in terms of all the different categories, the entire mix of resources, reserves in the various categories has been more or less been stable based on ongoing work on the upstream end. The utilization by sector is as shown here. I won't dwell on this, but certainly it's well known that LNG takes up a significant part of the production, the utilization of natural gas. Power is also a significant part, and ammonia and methanol. The location of facilities, as I said before, off the East Coast, North Coast as well for gas, but off the West Coast, we have the Point Lisas estate, down at Point Poten, Atlantic, and of course the emerging Union Industrial Estate in Lebre. In Point Lisas, and again, I mentioned before, these are the figures in terms of the improvement in production and exports from 2006 to 2007, from 2016 to 2017, showing that in fact we are coming out of the challenges being experienced by the gas curtailment, and we are hoping, of course, as Minister indicated earlier, that with the additional investment and activity by the suppliers, the supply profile is going to continue to be on the upswing. Now at Atlantic, this is just showing the capacities at Atlantic. This is Atlantic exports by country. We export LNG to a diverse mix of locations. You can see here we are among the top 7 LNG exporters. And in fact, I just came back from a meeting of a forum, the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, which Trinidad and Tobago actually holds the presidency of the forum. The Honorable Minister is the president of the forum. And in fact, the forum recognizes Trinidad and Tobago as a leader in the natural gas industry. Power generation, that's the mix in terms of the installed capacity. One point we want to make with respect to installed capacity is that we have capacity currently in excess of peak demand. That presents a bit of a challenge, particularly in the context of our desire to diversify the mix of power away from 100% gas, because all of this installed capacity is 100% gas. But we want to introduce into the mix renewables to ensure that we meet our obligations under the Paris Accord. In terms of alternative fuel, we ratified the Paris Accord earlier this year in February. We have a couple initiatives ongoing at the ministry. The waste-to-energy initiative, where the intention is to establish a waste-to-energy facility to produce power at the Beetham landfill. The analysis of proposals is complete, and we'll soon be going out with respect to a request for proposals to invite parties to make proposals for the establishment of that facility. We've also just closed the expression of interest invitation for utility-scale renewable energy power generation. That's on the 8th, that was last week. And similarly, there'll be an evaluation of the proposals submitted with a view to moving forward with introducing renewable energy into the power generation mix. We have a target of 10% by 2021. It's an aggressive target, but certainly the responses to this invitation is going to inform how we proceed. And then finally, but not least, CNG. CNG has been introduced into the mix, and it's a significant part of the energy mix. We feel that based on having the natural gas resource and having the ability to utilize as compressed natural gas, the NGC CNG is our key actor in terms of moving this process forward. And the government is leading by example. Based on a cabinet decision, all government ministries and state enterprises are mandated that by the end of this year, they are to any new procurement of transportation vehicles is supposed to be CNG vehicles. So certainly there's a strong commitment by the government to move CNG forward as a fuel of choice in the transportation sector. The added benefit, of course, is the positive impact on reducing emissions. Planned activity, I went all on this. The minister gave a very comprehensive overview in terms of some of the activity being undertaken by the exploration and production companies. Investment in excess of, 10 billion US over the next 5 years. But certainly what that says is that there is activity that is going to contribute to the sustainability of supply of natural gas and, of course, improving the oil production statistic, which, of course, contributes to revenues as we go forward. The oil production forecast is, as seen here, on an upward swing. Based on current investment plans, that is what we are seeing. With gas, there's a little edge, a wedge shape here based on the timing of certain investments. But at the end of the day, over the longer term, we expect to see an improvement in natural gas production. In terms of future development, again, these are some of the things mentioned by the minister earlier in his presentation in terms of the projects being pursued by the upstreamers, so I won't dwell on this. And of course, the very important discussions that we are having with our neighbors in Venezuela are ongoing. In fact, as we speak, there's a team across in Venezuela having discussions with PDVSA and the government of Venezuela. We are going to have some additional discussions later this week at the government level in terms of progressing all of these projects, in addition to the very important supply of gas from the Dragon field, which is not a cross-border field, but certainly the Venezuelans have embraced the idea that they have resources that they can leverage in the shortest possible time, utilizing capacity available in our facilities, installed facilities here, to facilitate monetization of their natural gas resources. The competitive bid round was mentioned by the minister. We intend to come out in this quarter with an invitation. There are several blocks near shore, which we intend to offer to the stakeholders. The blocks selected have been informed in large measure by the overwhelming response to our nomination process, in which we invite companies to indicate their interest on particular areas, on any area. And in fact, the response has been overwhelming, and we will be going out with a bid round in the nearshore and shallow initially, and then later on, possibly towards the end of this year into next year, going forward with a deep water round, again based on the response to our invitation to nomination. So in terms of the energy sector going forward, this is a busy slide with a lot of logos, and it's not exhaustive. Of course, the energy sector, as defined by us, includes all the stakeholders. And in fact, we encourage collaboration among stakeholders with the government and embracing and involving in projects that sometimes challenges seen by one stakeholder are really opportunities that can be accessed by others. So certainly we are here to facilitate any project going forward and collaboration among the stakeholders. One important project I just want to mention here, there's a collaboration ongoing with respect to CO2 enhanced oil recoveries, the SIRM initiative, which involves academia, companies, the Ministry of Energy as well. That project is designed to improve oil production by virtue of injecting CO2, but at the same time, there's a dual benefit in terms of sequestering some CO2 and improving our emission profile and enabling us to achieve some of the Paris obligations. So in summary, I just want to reiterate, I mean, some of you may have seen some of these things, but I'm telling you things you know. Trinidad is a strategic location. We have a stable democracy, a stable legal system. We have competitive gas pricing. Some may argue it's competitive in some aspects and uncompetitive in others. A flexible fiscal regime that can adopt and adapt to all situations. Transparent decision-making, liberalized currency. We have a highly skilled workforce, and trade liberalization and the formalization of strategic alliances is something that we support. So I just want to, again, this is just to reiterate, I want to just finally say that at the end of the day, it's going to be a product of collaboration among all stakeholders. It's a national effort. As the slogan for today goes, it's our oil, it's our gas. I want to add it's our sustainable energy mix, and it's our future. So with those few words, I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, P.S. Lashley, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. Ladies and gentlemen, there is great hope. We came in as an administration and we met significant curtailment issues with respect to our gas industry. You would have heard from our first two presenters the delivery of a lot of hope. That hope is real, because within recent months in our conversations with our upstreamers, EOG, Shell, BPTT, and BHP, and as you've heard from the presenters, they are investing significantly into exploration. The new technology associated with seismic is throwing up great results. There's a lot more seismic being done. And the exploration and production curve, thankfully, is on an upswing. So we are already starting to see the benefits and the advantages by the new technology, and importantly, the investments of these upstream companies, which has led to significant discussions with our downstream partners. So there is good news. Another area that this administration is focused on and shall be focusing on implementation, schedule, and scheme are marginal and stranded fields. Because as we've discussed, these are depleting resources. And what you would expect is there are pockets of oil and gas that we have located There's a significant project that is coming on stream now being led by Renewable. And these small fields can be tapped by more nimble players in the industry and those who can do it at significantly less cost. So this administration is going to be spending a lot of time, energy, and effort, focus and emphasis on bringing up the gas from these marginal and stranded fields for our downstream industry at Point Lisas. You've also heard for the first time about us going across border. We're going across border to Venezuela, as P.S. Lashley said. We will also be heading to Venezuela again this week on Friday, where I will lead a team for us to hopefully bring to a conclusion and start shoring up the details of the discussions we've been having with the Venezuelan government for the Dragon field. There is also significant good news we'll be hearing in the coming weeks from our neighbors to the north, and in particular Grenada. So Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, and in particular our gas industry, continues to be an area of much hope. And that is one of the takeaways from today, that we continue to work hard and expend a lot of effort in this sector to ensure the sustainability as we go forward in the future. And without saying much more, I'd like now to welcome, for us to understand as a country what has been going on from our revenue side and the significance of this oil and gas sector for our revenue and what has taken place within recent times. Nobody better to do that than the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Vishnu Dhanpaul, who I ask to come now.
Thank you, Minister Young. Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Rowley, Minister Khan, Minister Imrit, Cabinet Ministers, members of Parliament, members of the media, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I'm again honored to be invited to be part of the Spotlight on Energy. In a similar manner to the last Spotlight, I'll pitch my presentation not to those in academia or to the technocrats, but to the general population of Trinidad and Tobago. Hopefully it will be simple and easy to understand. Although I have a few slides, I'm tempted to say that my first slide could easily have been my only slide, because it's a very instructive graph. And as you can see clearly, oil revenue as a percent of total revenue over the period 2007 to 2017, starting with 2008, moved from 45% of total revenue to 33% in 2011, and down to 1.2% in 2017. So if you follow the trend, 40% in 2007 to 1.2% in 2017. This precipitous decline in oil revenue impacted every sector of the economy. In the real sector, as we call it, economic growth declined significantly. In the fiscal accounts, we've had to introduce major fiscal consolidation efforts. In monetary policy, the central bank had to determine how it's going to use its instruments of monetary policy. In the external sector, it impacted on the balance of payments and on our foreign reserves. And as Minister Khan mentioned earlier, the question then becomes, was this drastic decline in oil revenue solely as a result of a decline in production or a decline in oil prices? I'll leave my colleagues to follow to answer that question. Let me just map oil revenue as a percent of total revenue versus total expenditure. And you can see from 2011, specifically, while revenue started to decline, expenditure continued to rise. So the gap between total expenditure and total revenue increased significantly over the period. Again, mapping oil prices on the taxes on income and profits of energy companies clearly see what transpired from 2015. In 2016 and 2017, revenues were significantly low. And in 2018, that bar there increased mainly because of the 12.5% royalty on oil and gas, the new 12.5%, which incidentally, I'm waiting anxiously for the March figures to come in to see what it amounts to. As Minister Khan said earlier, we are now a gas-based economy. And just for our general population and for the national community, and the fact that we are internet-savvy population, a lot of people would have been following our benchmark crude or the fortunes of our benchmark crude over the internet and observing that the average price has increased significantly above the budgeted price of $52 per barrel. And assume that if it's $60 per barrel average, that there's going to be a massive inflow of oil taxes. To the contrary, as Minister Khan again pointed out, because of the decline in production, one, and secondly, the inability of Petroleum to pay its petroleum taxes as well as its royalties, we may not see the level of oil revenues impacted by oil prices as we used to. As you can see, we are now a gas economy. However, the price of gas has been relatively flat over the period. This is another very instructive graph. Petroleum taxes. And I want to take some time here just for the national community to define these acronyms. Petroleum profit tax. Very simply, is a tax charge on the profits of companies engaged in exploring for and producing oil and gas. Companies pay PPT on their taxable profits after deducting expenses for activities linked to exploration and production. Again, I have to borrow words from Minister Khan. Let me repeat. Companies pay PPT on their taxable profits after deducting expenses for activities linked to exploration and production. The supplemental petroleum tax is a tax levied on an oil producer's gross income from the sale of crude. And more specifically, SPT is directly linked to the price of oil and is triggered when oil prices rise above US $50 per barrel. So, of course, the price of oil is averaging close to $60 a barrel. The national community, by definition and by wish, must expect more revenues to be coming in. We are not seeing that in the numbers. Royalties are payment made by a petroleum company for the right to explore and produce from Trinidad and Tobago's oil and gas acreage. And as you can see from the graph, SPT collection and PPT collection declined significantly from 2015 to 2017. Again, we're waiting for the numbers for the first quarter of the calendar year to come in to see what those numbers will look like. And this would be royalty payments. Again, significantly declining from 2014 to 2015, marginally up in 2017, and we're projecting, hopefully, to see some increase in 2018. And if we combine both graphs, you can see just how difficult the situation has been in 2016 and 2017 for companies who are not paying the SPT, PPT, and royalties. Again, let us take a look at the the tax revenue from the downstream sector, specifically ammonia and methanol. And you can clearly see again from 2015, the significant decline in collection of revenue from ammonia and methanol. And obviously, if you have such a significant, drastic decline in revenue over a prolonged period, it's going to impact on the macroeconomy. And how does it impact on the macroeconomy? Well, firstly, declining economic growth. Significantly declining economic growth. We are projecting a little positive growth in 2018. However, we've been able to manage inflation and unemployment to an extent, keeping both below 5%. On the fiscal account, it's been a little more challenging. And the current account balance, which is defined as expenditure, simply recurrent revenue minus recurrent expenditure, and the overall balance, which is the fiscal balance, you can see that since 2009, almost a full decade, the country has been experiencing fiscal deficits. This has led to a significant amount of fiscal consolidation, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. One of the strategies of fiscal consolidation on the expenditure side has been the reduction of the petroleum subsidy. As you can see, the petroleum subsidy stood at $7 billion in 2014, and is projected to be $950 million in 2018, of which $600 million would have to come from the Consolidated Fund, which incidentally was not budgeted for. But just to make a point here to the national community, and it was people held the view that the subsidy was removed in the last budget. It was not. There was a small subsidy. Even at $52 a barrel, there was a small subsidy. What we attempted to do was to bring fuel prices in line with prevailing market prices. And even at $52, as I said, there was a small subsidy. However, as the price of oil averages above $60 a barrel, the subsidy would climb, projected, to $950 million. And let me repeat, $600 million of which was not budgeted. So how do governments, or what did the government do to close the gap between revenue and expenditure? Well, one strategy that was used was extraordinary dividends from state enterprises, mainly the National Gas Company. Also, government embarked on a program of IPOs, and initial public offerings, and APOs, additional public offerings, for several state enterprises, to attempt to close this gap between expenditure and revenue. The gap this year, incidentally, is projected at $7.9 billion. The other methodology of financing the budget, what economists call below-the-line financing, obviously through borrowing from external sources or domestic sources. But what that does is increase the national debt. And I want to stress here, the net public sector debt, which stands at this moment at 62.5% of GDP. I just want to clarify something again for the national community. There's no definite magic number for debt as a percent of GDP. It depends on the country's strategic intent and its ability to repay its debt. So there are many first world countries, developed countries, with debt to the GDP ratio significantly over 100%, as we all know. So let me repeat again. It depends on the country's strategic intent and its ability to repay. In my opinion, there's no magic figure for debt as a percent of GDP. And on the external side, when you're one of the major revenue earners, foreign exchange earners, is declining, the price of which is declining, obviously you're going to have problems on your international reserves. However, our international reserves still amount to a little over $8 billion US, with more than 9 months of import cover. The international benchmark, or I should say the accepted international benchmark, is around 2 to 3 months of import cover. We are 9 months of import cover. So we have buffers. We also have a buffer called the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And this is where I'll end my contribution in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. That the mechanics of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, by definition, links the fund to the energy sector and energy revenue. As you can see, when the fund was introduced in 2007, we have contributed significantly over the years. However, because of declining revenues, we did not contribute in 2014 and 2015. And for the first time in our history, the government withdrew from the fund in 2016 and 2017. But what is very critical to understand here, and again for the national community, is that the fund at the end of at February 23, 2018, amounted to close to $6 billion, which compensated for the amount withdrawn by the government in 2016 and 2017. In other words, the interest income from the fund more than compensated for the withdrawal. And there were two major factors for this. One, obviously, prevailing international market conditions, and secondly, and I must say, through the astute management of our asset managers. And on this, hopefully, good news basis, I will end my contribution. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, one of the most telling slides from the Ministry of Finance that I'd like a minute to just emphasize for you was the slide that the PS had up on taxes on incomes and profits from oil companies in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you'd permit me, in 2008, we as a country earned $25.6 billion. That was our revenue from oil and gas companies. In 2011, it had dropped to $16 billion. In 2012, it was $15.8 billion. This is revenue for us, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. In 2013, it went to $14.7 billion. 2014, it went back up to almost $17 billion at $16.97 billion. In 2015, this dropped to $10.5 billion. In 2016, our revenue as a country, Trinidad and Tobago, from oil and gas dropped to $1 billion. And in 2017, our last fiscal year, it dropped to $472 million. So a drop from $16 billion to $472 million is not insignificant. And I think this should also be respectfully one of the takeaways for us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to understand that your government is dealing with a significant drop in revenue from what was previously the mainstream of Trinidad and Tobago, the revenue from the oil and gas sector. Our next presenter is going to be talking to us about local content and the maximization for Trinidad and Tobago in this sector via local content. Mr. Anthony Paul is an energy and strategy advisor focusing on assisting countries rich in extractives to retain more of the value generated by their resources and to manage them in a manner that supports sustainable development. He has advised governments in East, West, and Southern Africa, the Middle East, Central and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. In his more than 35 years in the industry, he has held technical, commercial, management, and leadership roles spanning the entire petroleum exploration and production value chain in government and state and multinational companies. He has worked for the Trinidad and Tobago Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Petroleum, Amoco Trinidad, BPTT, BP PLC. He is the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Permanent Local Committee for the Petroleum Sector, a member of the board of the Lloyd Best Institute of the West Indies and the Natural Resource Governance Institute. He holds a BSc Honours in Geology from the Imperial College of Science and Technology, University of London, and has an MS in Geophysics from the University of Houston, Texas. So at this time and at this moment, we as a country are focused on extracting maximum return for our citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Anthony Paul to give us his views.
Thank you, Minister. Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Senator the Honorable Franklin Khan, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, other ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. Minister Khan, it's an honor to be invited, and I thank you. It's a great opportunity to present something that I've been passionate about, especially to the national community. I will speak about a little bit about where the value is in oil and gas. And we tend to think of revenues and our local content. There may be more. I will speak about what local content is and what else there is in terms of getting value as we do oil and gas business. And how we can support national development and how we've gone about doing that in Trinidad and Tobago. And we've had a policy in place now since 2004 that's been viewed in many places as visionary, and we're leading in the way it set about getting value from oil and gas through local content. And I'll speak about where we are and how we're going forward from that. So one of the things we recognize is that intrinsically we have value in the resources below the ground. That value is achieved when you go after getting it out. And there are essentially three sets of stakeholders involved. The owner of the resource being the people, the manager of the resource being the government, and the investor. Well, investors have one clear, simple goal. It's converting the wealth of the people and taking it to their shareholders, as much of it as quickly as possible. That is their single goal. Now, they do employ good strategies towards getting that, and you have to admire them for that. Governments and countries have different objectives in getting this value from under the ground to above the ground. And the things they do is try to increase that, is getting more out of the ground to start with, getting it out cheaper, getting it out by getting more of the work done in country rather than outside of country. And I'll show you why that is important. And of course, getting a higher price, as we know. And then there are ways government use the revenue, collect more revenue, and make sure that there's more money to be collected by the tax systems in place. And then we speak about adding value. What else do we do to get more out of the resource? And of course, none of this happens unless it's managed well. So government's objectives are to do these things. And these are in support of a goal. And in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, where the resources are significant, what we try to do is to take this non-renewable resource under the ground and convert it to sustainable development or development above the ground. And the way you describe that typically is that you ensure that you have a sustainable economy, sustainable environment, communities are sustained and healthy, and that the governance in the country isn't destroyed. Now, as we all know, there are instances where each of these four elements of sustainability have been destroyed or badly damaged by oil and gas and minerals. There is an opportunity to improve each of these if managed well. And that is what countries who manage oil and gas well try to do. In doing that, there's some stages we go through. And it's important to understand these stages because they're connected. We know we have oil and gas under the ground, or sometimes we think we have. When do we go after it? When do we take it out? How quickly do we take it out? Now, those of us who were around in the conversation around should we build a fourth train or not, understood the challenges we faced and the pitfall that we faced in making that decision of going after train 4 and depleting the reserves we had quickly rather than over a long time. Now, that decision is not insignificant. But even so, having made that decision, we have to decide who do we engage to take it out at that pace. Now, we saw the two different perspectives, the investor wanting to take as much of your wealth as possible, and the country wanting to keep as much of the wealth as possible. So how do you manage that? How do you select the right party? How do you negotiate the right deal with that party? Now, as you know, what you get is what you negotiate. What you negotiate is a function of your capacity to negotiate. The people you have, the systems you have, the knowledge you have. After having negotiated a contract, you have to manage it. You have to make sure you get what you negotiated for. Again, that is done through your regulators. Again, they need capacity, they need tools, they need systems. You have to have those in place. Having done that, you have to make sure the operations that are ongoing, make sure you get the value you want. Through different ways, and we'll speak about that, getting more done in country, more local content, more additional value, meaning going downstream, for instance. Having done all of that, you still have to collect your taxes and your royalties and what's due to you. And you have to do that efficiently in a timely manner. And having done that, you have to make choices. What do I spend now? What do I save for the future? What do I spend on? What do I invest in for future growth? Those are all choices. Each choice, as we know, has implications on the other options we have. So we have to have trade-offs. How do we make those trade-offs? Typically, what countries do is say, let us come up with a policy and use that policy to help us put in place the legislation, the regulations, the institutions, the laws that manage the sector. But policies don't come out of thin air. And in fact, policies come out of a considered discussion, determination of what is it we're trying to achieve. Sorry, this is going too quickly. And in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, going back to the 1960s, and we repeated it in 2004 in building the local content policy, we said, what are the activities that are going to happen over the next few years? What are the implications of that in terms of what can be derived in the country? What's the state of the country? What's the nature of the resource? Where do we want to go? And using that, create a vision of how the sector can support national development. And then embed that in national development plans, in strategies. And then using those plans and strategies to come up with policies, principles by which all stakeholders should participate. And then ensuring they do it by embedding that into legislation, into regulations. Making sure you have institutions whose role it is to oversee these regulations and the contracts that come from them, but also making sure the regulator has the capacity to do that. And one of the key tools of capacity to ensuring things get done is accountability. And individuals and institutions need to be able to say what decision they made, what actions they took, why they took it, and how they implemented it. And quite often, those are embedded in the standard procedures that institutions use. And when the Ministry of Energy was formed after the 1963 Commission of Inquiry, by 1969 legislation and 71 regulations, the ministry built its own systems and procedures that helped us to get to a really good state for an industry in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, many of us see today's decline in the industry and think we've been doing badly. Actually, we've done really, really well in the past. And we did some good things to get there. And included in that is this process we've gone through, which is now embedded in what is called the Natural Resource Charter that many countries are following today. Now, it's not that Trinidad invented it, but Trinidad actually did it without having a textbook to follow. Yeah? So one of the things we didn't do as well as we could have is to continuously monitor how we were doing and improve on it. And that is something that has allowed the system to go into somewhat of a decline from the 80s to now and see the outcome we have today. So those pieces connected, working properly, are the elements of good governance that are required to get below the ground value to above the ground sustainability. And that's what we're trying to do. Yeah? So, Minister mentioned the value chain, Mr. P.S. Lashley did, and for the public out there, there's a series of steps that are involved in getting oil and gas out of the ground. The first is finding it. We call it exploration. Then assessing how big it is, where it is, whether it's oil or gas, how much, how to get it out, what facilities you need to put in place, how many wells, where to place the wells, that's appraisal. And then doing it, building the platforms, drilling the wells, putting in pipelines. And then once we've done that, to produce it, get it out to the ground, sell it. After all of that is done, then we have to remove all the facilities we put on the seafloor. Because remember, the oil and gas comes out. There's nothing left. Similarly, on land, we have to remove the old wellheads on the surface. So that's the whole process. Now, this is where it gets interesting. All of that has to be paid for. All of that is paid for from the sale of the oil and gas produced. Now, on the left-hand side is the price of a barrel. Ignore the number for the moment. That's illustrative. Exploration costs are recovered from that. Appraisal costs are recovered from that. Development costs are recovered from that. Production costs are recovered. Now, remember this. This is our oil and our gas that is paying for these things. Now, yes, the companies spend the money in front, but they don't give us a donation. They are actually borrowing many times from their parents at rates higher than bank rates and administrative costs that are gold-plated. So there's a fat profit in bringing that money in, which they then recover. Yeah? And then, having recovered it, out of that, we get royalties and taxes. And they get their profits. And some of their profits, and they, of course, also recover the cost of their own operation. I say this because most of that spend goes on third parties, so I've pulled aside their own spend separately. Now, we've tended to focus on getting value from the government revenue, meaning the taxes and profits that the company, taxes on the profits the companies make and the royalty. In addition, we can get people employed, companies provide goods and services, and that is where the local content aspect is in this value chain. Companies also can employ people, and they also do things called CSR, where people benefit. Now, I want to make it clear that CSR is not local content. In fact, if I were to go by Minister Young's definition, money that's tax recoverable costs are only costs that go directly into operations. So CSR, as good as it is, isn't an operating cost. It benefits to the company, but it's not part of the operations. And many jurisdictions don't allow those things to be recovered. Yeah? So this is a bigger picture of something Mr. Lashley put up there around the value chain. Upstream, sometimes called exploration and production, is where you look for, find, develop, and produce. Then you move it physically, you transport it, you store it. As the midstream, sometimes you convert it in its physical state from liquid to gas. And then you process it by chemical processes to make other products. That's downstream. Yeah? And then there's a similar value chain for natural gas, where you make petrochemicals and natural gas into power. And each of those, as P.S. Lashley showed, have support by other kinds of infrastructure, services, regulatory agencies, and so on. Now, local content goes after the spend in providing services in the upstream, midstream, and downstream, and that covers mostly the supply chain. Value addition is where you take the raw material and convert it to higher value products, like ammonia and methanol, like refined products, but also using the activities to capture some more value in the country, and I'll show you that. And that happens across the chain, and I've highlighted the upstream and midstream for the downstream value add. But all across the value chain, the opportunities for local content and value add. And if we understand that, do the work to figure out where it is, how to get it, and then go after it, then we'll see a huge amount of value to be captured. Keep in mind what I showed you earlier. We spoke about $10 billion of spend coming in the next 5 years. How much of that comes back to the country? How do you get that? You get that by local participation, by locals providing goods and services, by work being done in country, and companies doing these services being liable to pay taxes in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of the work that is done outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Companies don't pay taxes necessarily, and they probably aren't even charged withholding taxes for the money that's paid to them. So here's the kinds of services that are used in the exploration and production, for instance, and the rest of the value chain. Some of them, like drilling, well services, geology, geophysics, petroleum engineering, are limited to the upstream aspect of it. Some of them, like engineering, construction, fabrication, are used in the upstream but continue into the mid and downstream. Support services, whether it's logistics or business services, go along the value chain. That's where the money goes, into those services. As you can see from the graphic, if you can see it, most of the money goes into engineering, construction, fabrication, construction, or drilling and services. But the others are not insignificant. And if we think about the resource as being finite, the time for the activity as being limited, a lot of local content initiative is to go after those things that are transferable across other sectors. Why? Because you need to invest in building capacity to be able to do it. And if you invest in that capacity, how do you sustain what you've built? This is a graphic to illustrate the capital spend in gray on the bottom of the horizontal line, and revenues in pink above the line. Now, as you can see in the different stages, there are big chunks of capital expenditure before any production and any revenue in exploration, appraisal, and development. Some capital during the operations and maintenance phase, a lot of ongoing operating costs. Now, the periods for exploration, appraisal, and development are quite short. Typically 1 to 5 years, could be up to 10 for each, but the production phase can be 20, 30, 50 years or more. So it makes sense, therefore, to think if we were to invest in capacity to provide goods and services, we should invest in the areas where we have enough time to regain that investment. So therefore, production operations make sense. That is a low-hanging fruit, and that is something that we should never give up. But here's the thing. When this policy was written, here's a picture of Trinidad and Tobago's potential and future production. This is premised on Train 4. Each of the trains we built had dedicated fields to make sure the reserves were sufficient to satisfy the finances. Included in that were many small fields. If you look at this graph, each sliver is a new field. As you have a plant, you have a continuous level of production from a field into that plant. A plant can only take whatever is made to take. So that bottommost blue layer was a field being developed, meeting the market demands. Two things are happening there. One, you're adding more plants, so you're increasing the upward volume. And two, you're extending the life of the plant by adding new fields. So as you add more fields, you get more gas. But the gas fields decline naturally, so you have to replace them. Now, here's the thing. Because these small fields were dedicated, and because we were exporting essentially a raw material, without any conversion of value, the agreement tacitly between the government and the companies was that we would add value elsewhere. We would have fabrication, we'd have construction. And if we made sure we brought those small fields on, we'd have continuous work in Labitco. We'd have continuous engineering somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. But what happened is that somewhere along the line, the contracts were renegotiated. The fields were de-dedicated. The small fields were pushed back down the line. Now remember this, concessions were probably given in negotiating for the small fields to come on. So two things happened by decoupling them. One, the big fields have a longer production, so therefore the time between new platforms and engineering widens. Therefore, Labitco shuts down, Tufco shuts down. Secondly, the companies come back to argue that, hey, these small fields aren't economic. So can we get some concessions? Leaving out conveniently, can we get some more concessions? And getting concessions twice for the same thing. So it's important to understand there's a history behind all this. And what we see today didn't just pop out of thin air, it evolved. And that evolution is informative. Now, we talk about local content, and I'll talk about what that involves. And we spoke about engineering, design, fabrication, seismic, and so on. But what do you do? What do you invest in? What can you do? And the first point is, so what is the demand for goods and services. How many platforms are we going to build? When? What have we got on the ground? Have we got engineering firms, fabrication firms? Well, guess what? We did all that work. And we determined that we had demand for oil and gas, engineering, fabrication, seismic processing, drilling. And the agreement tacitly, again, was to build a drilling school, was to build seismic processing companies, was to build engineering companies. And in truth and in fact, the demand supported that. And we did build 5 or 6 world-class engineering companies, seismic processing companies. We never built a drilling school. And based on that demand, then we said, fine, let's find a way to pursue it. Let's have a strategy. Let's see which ones we do, which we prioritize, how we build them. And then let's make sure all the people who are a part of this, the university, the companies, the service companies, have the same principles by which they follow. Let's put a policy in place. But that policy doesn't run itself. A policy has to be run by somebody. And that's where we got to the point that if you're going to get these people going, we have to have them. We haven't got them. We have to train them. We haven't got companies. We have to build them. How do we do that? So the policy included building human and business capacity and then putting in place the mechanism to deliver it. Making sure that local content doesn't happen until somebody is employed. It doesn't happen until a contractor gets a contract. Capacity building is an input into local content, but it isn't local content. It's an essential input. So all of these things have to happen, but nothing happens unless somebody is in charge of making sure the pieces are in place, the stakeholders know what they're supposed to do, and they're doing it. So we did take the opportunity at the time to say, how do we go forward? We had a history of world-class service companies, world-class people. We knew that. And I'll show you a graphic to illustrate that. So we said, what can we do with big demand for goods and services suddenly? Now remember this, when we were building the Atlantic trains, we were increasing the activities in the industry and the production of natural gas at a pace and to scales that we had never seen before. So we knew we had to do something different. And in that was say, let us start by making sure the companies we have get work. People we have get employed. But while we're doing that, let's make sure we improve the capacity. For those who are not, make them competitive globally. And as we have so much demand, let us move to another level and create world-scale companies. Why? Because we knew the production would end and companies would have capacity and can then export it. So we had 3 horizons. Use what you have and improve it, expand what you have by adding assets or capability, and then make them globally competitive. That was the strategy. Yeah? And we said, you know what? At this time, in fact, the local content policy ran in parallel with what came out of the 2020 vision. It's about making Trinidad and Tobago a developed country in 20 years. It was about creating an innovative and technology-driven economy. So we said, let's look at the industry. Let's look at the goods and services it requires. And let's see which of those match the aspirations and needs of this new country, of the current situation. Which ones create jobs? Which ones create high-skilled jobs so we get good companies? Which ones allow us to get innovation and technology? Which ones can supersede the cyclicity of oil prices? So we looked at that, and then we said, you know, we're a small country. There's a lot to do. We can't do everything. How do we choose? So we said, some of those actually are highly sustainable. Some of them are very highly impactful. Maybe we should focus there. All that work had huge seismic activity. Geophysical seismic activity uses more processing power, computer processing power, than almost any industry in the world. A lot of data to be managed. Can we find a way to put that in place to build our IT base? We're talking about a technology-driven economy. And we did get, like I said, about 5 seismic processing companies in the country using that technology. We have a lot of data. One of the problems with Trinidad's situation, and one of the reasons we challenge with ongoing activity, is that data is locked up in companies under some very archaic laws. And because of that, the country doesn't have a future resource story. We heard about the Ryder Scott report. That tells us what we know. What it doesn't tell us is what else is there that we don't know. And how do we go about doing that? And that is embedded in data. Data not being available means you can't use data processing, and therefore can't do the IT you want it to do. and assess your resources. Series of things need to be changed. Right? But we also said, in the same way we're going to move local content generally, how do we build capacity? Let's look at 3 horizons. One, let's make sure we create more jobs. At the bottom of this thing, let's get people employed. But also, let's create some world-class companies. One of the things I learned from Lloyd Best is that we've always been field officers, meaning somebody at head office always does something for us. So we have a resource, we want to assess it, we want to value it, find a way to get it out. So somebody comes down, does the analysis, and the results could be oil, gas, beaches, plantations. And they will do the assessment, and they'll say, this is what we have, this is the options we have to develop it, this is the potential market, this is potential technology. Let's make a business case, find some financing, hire some contractors, manage them. These are the things that every business needs: analysis, strategy, financing, project management, contractor management. But those happen for the first project, and the people who do it go back home. Second time you find an asset, the same people come back with somebody else, do it, and go back home. So you never build that capacity. That made sense in the colonial world, where all we needed to do was turn switches, as we were told. This gives us an opportunity with these activities to engage our companies to participate and do that. But to do that, you have to have skin in the game. You have to have finance. At the time we were doing this, Trinidad had a huge overlay of excess capital. And that wasn't being efficiently used. People couldn't invest, couldn't get ownership or participate in business decisions unless they put equity in place. So the strategy here said, let's get the capital market working. So let's start by learning the operations of oil and gas. Let's then go on to learning the business, and let's go on to controlling the business. And if you're going to export goods and services, believe you me, exporting people will not cut it for you. You have to export businesses. And that's what this strategy tried to do first. And we invested heavily. Minister spoke about the investment in TOFCO, and that was hundreds of millions of dollars. We invested in education. Our brightest kids went into University of West Indies to Petroleum Geoscience. It was harder to get into that than into medicine. And today, some of those kids are unemployed. Work has moved from Trinidad to overseas. Foreigners are being paid while our kids are being laid off. My generation is on the retirement side of the cycle. There was very little between us and that generation. There was a huge period of non-employment. From the 80s, when the oil price dropped, to the 90s and early 2000s, people didn't employ others. There's a gap between people who know and those who are supposed to do it in the future. And that gap isn't being minded. Nobody's minding the gap. This was meant to build people. And we put in place a lot in terms of technical and vocational training and other kinds of training. So we've done development. We identified the kinds of skill and people we wanted to focus on. And interestingly, not surprisingly, given the duration of the services, given the value of them, we selected things like engineering, fabrication, project management, business development, strategy. All of these things were chosen. But we also focused on those that would give us a technological edge, allow us to learn the things and build the things that we can use in other businesses. This was a strategy to exploit the oil and gas sector, to extract from an extractive industry, to build sustainable industries based on oil and gas. That's what this was about. Now, all those seismic companies have gone. Has the work stopped? Absolutely not. We hear about these massive, newfangled seismic surveys that are uncovering new things. Where's that seismic processing done? Out of country. We have about $10 billion in investment. And where's the engineering being done? Out of country. Why did those shops be allowed to shut down? But it's not new. In the 1970s, when we were in the first oil boom, the Ministry of Petroleum and Mines, as it was called then, invested in a study to understand the feasibility of building platforms. It was done by George Wimpy and Company, who became Carillion, who is no longer. But George Wimpy actually built what was then in the 1960s the world's biggest platform, designed it in Trinidad and built it in Guapo for trademark. In the 1970s, when Amoco came, suddenly we weren't able to engineer and build. We have to do it in Houston because that's where the comfort zone is. Okay? So for a long time, we were told we can't do it, even though we knew we could do it. But we accepted what we were told. Here's an example of the reality we faced. This is a matrix of the services that are required to run an offshore platform. Each of those names on there is a local company, locally owned, employing locals. When we realized we're going to build a platform every year and a half or so and have new fields putting in place, we said, let's take this to the third horizon. Let's convert this into a world-class operations and maintenance company. A tender went out. Two of the biggest companies here came together, formed a joint venture, formed alliances with some of the others, put a tender in to say, we will build a world-class company. Guess what happened? The tender was built, a foreign company was brought in, with a local partner who was nowhere on this list. These companies were wiped out, essentially. These companies are world-class companies even then. So, just to summarize, in a sense, what local content is. Local content is not an end to itself. And I think we tend to think that local content is about employing people, making sure a few contractors get jobs. It's about increasing national wealth. It's about taking more of our money that's being spent and keeping it in country with our people. It's about using the opportunity of activities to build our skills. Now, we tend to think that you learn by going to school. Everybody in this room and outside here knows that you learn by doing. If locals don't get a chance to participate, they don't grow. A lot of old laws, and I've been working in several places, and even our laws, there's this notion in law that says you will use local goods and services provided they're competitive in terms of quality, cost, timeliness. But guess what? If you've never done it before, you won't be competitive. So for the first bid, you're disqualified. For the second bid, you haven't done anything more, so you're still disqualified. So what the policy says is that you will use locals and build capacity along the way. Luckily, and once it gets in place, it'll help us, the Public Procurement Act requires that the government use 10% local content. So when we have these master plans and these reserve studies, hopefully we'll have locals participating and getting to know how to do that and being able to do it ourselves more frequently and cheaper. Yeah? So local content builds capacity in people, in businesses, in facilities, in infrastructure. And a lot of things that happen. So a lot of us know Kariri, right? One of the things that helped Kariri become a center you could take, in Gary Maguire's case, his rum punch, to get it tested, validated, and certified, is that Kariri has a chemical analytical laboratory. The Petroleum testing lab was set up initially to take oil and product from the refinery, test it. That test of the physical and chemical properties determine the value that would then be used to determine taxes and royalties. And because that lab had to meet certain standards, it could then take on extra work for food. Yeah? And then manufacturers could get their food products certified by a certified lab. So there's a ripple effect that goes on into that. And the government set up a local content committee to oversee the implementation of the policy. And the committee is cross-sectoral: Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Trade, Finance, Education, Chambers of Commerce, other chambers, Bankers Association, a whole range of stakeholders involved in the parts of the value chain and getting business and people to participate. What the committee's approach was let's see what we have in place. And when we looked at the existing legislation, and you have to remember this, in 1963, one of the first things the government did after independence was to say, let us understand our resources in oil and gas. Let us find a way to make sure we get the most from it, and our people participate and benefit from the most. And a commission of inquiry was set up. And that commission actually was very robust in engaging stakeholders. There were several consultations in analyzing the resources under the marketplace. And it was asked to answer the question, how do we get more from our oil in terms of refined products? How do we make more from our natural gas? How do we get more locals trained to participate? How do we sustain employment? That was key from day one. Now, all of these questions that were asked were answered in the report, and then solutions were embedded in the 1969 Petroleum Act and 1971 Petroleum Regulations. So you'll see in a slide coming up that there are very clear laws and regulations that mandate companies to hire locals, to train locals, to pay locals the same as foreigners for doing the same job. That was the basis of a court case recently under the Equal Opportunities Act. But it's been in the Petroleum Regulations since 1971. It doesn't happen. So there's a whole series of things that are in law that would allow locals to get jobs, to get trained, more value to stay in country, but hasn't been implemented. Why? Simply put, we have an overwhelmed situation where the industry grew rapidly and the Ministry of Energy didn't have the capacity or the growth pace to keep up with it. Things were working fine, but what we see today is a combination of that divergence of what is being done and what's being needed. So I think the recognition is that that is changing, and that is useful. Now, a lot of that, what we want, only happens if we can track what's happening. As they say, what gets measured gets done. The law provides for a lot of reporting and auditing of company spend. The minister can ask a company to report on a person-by-person basis how much they pay, on a contract-by-contract basis how much they spend. So you can compare local and foreign. Okay? Of course, the ministry has not the capacity to do that. But in there lies the detail, and that detail is where we will find local content. But of course, a lot of that would seem like a lot of hard work. You can't ramp up so quickly. But luckily for regulators, companies do this all the time. Companies track things in minute detail and keep records. And in our law, government has access to all records and can capture that. So as we get into that, we find that we will see spaces for local content, we'll see slippage, and we'll be able to close that. If we can standardize that and make it easy to administer, it takes the burden off the ministry. So the Local Content Committee has been trying to help the ministry design new systems and procedures and support them by technical input to implement those. And if those work, then I think we can get a better position on local content. So like I said, the laws have a lot of power. And the ministry takes great credit in the 2010 bid round, put a lot of new conditions, stronger conditions, in the production sharing contracts. So the whole series of things that move from definition to implementation, oversight. And I will very quickly show a couple of those, not go into detail, but let you know that every operator in the country, in the oil and gas industry, must have a license. And the minister may put into each license conditions to allow for this kind of reporting, to allow for more locals to participate. So the minister has several bites of the cherry at getting what the country wants in terms of getting value. Here's an example. So Regulation 42.2 says companies must present to the minister programs for industrial and technical education and training. That's very clear. That's how people get capacity built. And with a view to replacing foreigners by locals. And again, it goes on to say, affording nationals the opportunity to occupying every senior position. So it's very clear that what the intent was, it's in law. In addition, the provisions about reporting and monitoring, what information companies must keep, what they must present to the minister. And that is in there. And here it even says, in terms of petrochemical licenses, you must tell the minister the quantity, source, and price of indigenous and foreign hydrocarbon raw materials received, and then the number, nationality, duties, and remuneration of persons employed. And the minister may ask for other things. There's a lot of information that can be used to go after what is being done by the companies, where's the money spent, what does it need to do those jobs. And the definitions on local content. And the Local Content Committee has adopted the definition of local content as applies in the Public Procurement Act. We did find, however, now what it says is that local content will be defined by the value of the spend that stays in the local economy. Now, there was a fairly embarrassing presentation recently where someone tried to show a multiplier effect to imply that this would count towards local content. That's not the case. And this refers to direct spend. And maybe we need to clarify that, because you can fudge numbers. And in fact, if you ask me, the numbers are questionable. So local content is about how much of the money spent stays in the economy. Now, think about that. Think about what the Permanent Secretary said earlier on, Permanent Secretary Dhanpaul, that we produced all this oil, all this gas, sold it. A lot of money was spent. We got no taxes and no royalty, but somebody got outspent. Where did that spend go? You know, we have companies. I showed this slide, all these local companies who were running platforms. We have companies in Trinidad who have been doing well services for years and years. World-class companies that have operations in Brazil, Venezuela, really good companies. Been running the fields here for years. Suddenly the operator decides we will give a regional contract to do work in Houston, New Orleans, wherever else. Of course, our local company can't do it, and Trinidad. So guess what? Our local company gets disqualified, can't even bid. So a foreign company gets the bid. Unit cost goes up 20%. We pay more. They are contracted outside of Trinidad and Tobago, probably invoiced outside of Trinidad, paid there. Do we charge withholding tax? I don't know. Do we know what they pay back? Do they charge them taxes? I don't know. But the local company doesn't get the job, our people don't get employed, and we don't collect taxes. So there's a whole series of things that can go wrong, but the legislation in place helps us prevent that. So, quickly speaking, local content, increasing it by increasing the level of employment, the quality of the businesses, access to finance, and so on. The ability to capture it is based on the implementation strategy and the quality of the oversight for that, and that is key. So increasing local content means increasing capacity, increasing the services on people, and so on. I want to say that we've had a world-class policy that's used by other countries. It's founded on robust analysis, and the government invested billions in capacity building. Labid Code, NEC built that. Yeah? Local Content Committee, as I said before, is going to use industry procedures, law and regulation to ensure that we get the value that we deserve. Now, I want to say that we will build the tools and make it available to contractors, to government agencies. So, for instance, the Ministry of National Security gives work permits based on company applications. The Ministry of Energy sits on that work permit committee. But is there a database to say how many drillers in Trinidad and Tobago are there? What are the competencies? There's none. So work permit applications describe the competencies of the person they want to bring in rather than demand the job. So the game's played. So we need to find ways to do that. And in doing these things, putting systems, procedures, tools, information in the domain for the government agencies, the suppliers, the operators, you get some transparency around that. Now, we talk about building the capacity of the ministry, and we know we're cutting costs, and the Minister of Finance is here. And one of the things we tend to forget is that the oil and gas industry, the producers, have an obligation under law to pay the entire cost of administration of the industry. So guess what happens when we cut back on the cost of the ministry? We give them extra profits to go home. Yeah? In the meantime, however, they hire high-end advisors, consultants, lawyers to negotiate against us. And then we bring into the table our in-house lawyers, get us there, but not with the capacity to do all the work needs to be done. And we negotiate a deal, and we get the deal we negotiate for, based on our capacity. And then they hand us a bill. Here's our cost. Please, can we recover it? So we pay them to negotiate against us, but we can't pay ourselves to negotiate on our behalf. That's the reality. Yeah? So here's the thing. We got here because we were assertive. We were clear that this is we country, we oil, we gas. Yeah? And unless we have that attitude and say that we must be the major beneficiary, we end up where we are. We will not get a fair share if, one, we don't get the game played by our rules, by we rules, and unless we behave like we own and control the resources, and our own destiny. And stop thinking somebody's doing us a favor. Nobody's doing you a favor. Everybody's looking after their own self-interest. We have to look at our self-interest. We have to make sure that those who are in the front line doing this on our behalf are given the power, the authority, and the capacity to do it. I thank you.
And on that conclusion by Mr. Paul, he provides the perfect opening for what I'm about to say. You would have heard the Minister of Energy indicate in very clear language here this morning that that is indeed exactly what your government is doing for Trinidad and Tobago. Because for the first time, leading from the head, and it's amazing the criticism that it attracted, but leading from the head, we had the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago go to Houston, into the boardrooms of the big energy companies, Shell, BP, and EOG, and assist in the conclusion of the future of the gas industry from 2019 go forward for the next 5-year period. And this government gives its commitment and is in the process of having those renegotiation and negotiation conversations with the simple interest being achieving the best possible result for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And we've done exactly what Mr. Paul has just suggested. This government has gone and retained one of the largest law firms, international law firms with offices in the United States and in Europe, to assist us in our negotiations and discussions on behalf of you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to make sure that we get the best possible local returns for our shareholders who are the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. When we came in as an administration in 2015, one of the first things we were faced with was a comprehensive report on the oil and gas sector, focused particularly on the gas sector, which makes up the majority of that part of the economy, by Poten and partners. We set about pursuing, perusing, understanding, questioning the content of this report and getting an understanding of it, for it to provide the roadmap for us to go out and negotiate the best possible deals for Trinidad and Tobago. And we've continued in conversation with them. And to supplement the team for the government, for the people, we have continued to retain Poten and partners to help us to make sure we have the best resources in the room as we go out and hold these discussions and complex negotiations with the various companies that operate in this sector. And as Minister Khan said, for the first time as a government, we laid the gas master plan in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, not only for discussion, but for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand what is going on, which is what also brought us to today. So I'd like now at this stage, we'd be inviting Poten and partners to do really the feature presentation and to tell us what they found, what they suggest, how we'll go forward. And to do that, I have Graham Hartnell, manager of the LNG and gas consulting at Poten and Partners. Graham leads the global LNG and gas consulting activities for Poten and Partners from London. He has over 30 years of experience in oil and gas industries, began his career in the oil and gas exploration sector, and has subsequently worked in a variety of upstream, downstream roles in a wide range of countries across the globe. He has wide experience in developing corporate sector strategy, providing commercial, technical support to oil and gas companies, governments, regulators, financial institutions on technical, economic, commercial, financial issues related to oil, gas developments, and he's been active in the LNG industry for over 20 years. He is also being assisted, and I am apologizing in front because they've given me the wrong sheet of paper, so they just repeat Graham. He's also ably assisted by his partner, and it will be a double presentation by two of them. And before I invite them on stage, I'd just like to say one of the things that we've also done as an administration that the public may not be aware of with the gas master plan is after the government and the cabinet had digested it, there was a setting up of a committee that is chaired by Mr. Motley, a subcommittee of the Energy Subcommittee of Cabinet, that then took upon the task of meeting with all of the players in the industry and their views on the gas master plan. So the widest possible consultation was done before the government then sat down and began to strategize how we would be moving forward and dealing with the future of the industry. So without any further ado, I invite Poten and Partners to come and provide us with their presentation.
Right, thank you very much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of our presentation today is, as has been well trailed in the course of the morning, value generation in the gas sector. And as you have heard, we were engaged by the Ministry in 2014 to undertake a master plan which in brief was an evaluation of the sector as it was at that time, to look at the future, look at the potential options and prepare a roadmap for the future for policy development. As you would imagine, as part of that exercise, an important part of that exercise was the determination of how the country is realising value from its natural gas molecules, and we undertook a great deal of work looking at where value was being generated from, and what we found in that original analysis that in fact it was the petrochemicals that were providing the greater value, notably ammonia, and that LNG had performed relatively poorly, despite the fact that the global gas markets at that time, which is what LNG is selling into, were strong. So obviously this was a key point of investigation. And subsequently to this, of course, we were asked by the government to update this. Our original findings had been based on data that was up to the end of 2014, and there has been quite a significant change in global energy markets since then. So the government asked us to come and look at how this had changed in this period of time. And that's what we're going to present to you today. So, first I'd like to say a couple of words about the industries that are here, the key industries being, of course, LNG, methanol, ammonia, urea. These are export industries. Some 80% of the gas from the country is being exported in different forms. And they have somewhat different scale and rather different costs associated with them as well. And you can see in the chart that I have here on the right-hand side the relative costs of a world-scale train. And of course, when you're an exporting country, you want to be developing everything that you're doing on a world-scale basis, the biggest there is, because you capture the greatest economies of scale. The methanol and ammonia markets globally are smaller than those of LNG, and the typical plant size is smaller as well. And I think a key point to be made here in relation to LNG is its huge size. I mean, the cost of these are enormous. A single train project of 5 million tonnes is what you might describe as starter size these days, and you're looking at investment costs of, in the order of $6 billion. It will depend upon where you're actually doing it and some other local criteria. But this is the order of magnitude that you are looking at, and few, if any, players have the ability to finance this themselves. These are almost invariably project financed, and the project financing is supported by long-term contracts. So it is almost universally the case that new projects have long-term contracts where some 90% of their output is sold on 20-year contracts. And typically these are entered into probably, at least 5 years before the project actually starts up as well. So you can see that you've got a contract of 20 years, you've negotiated it 5 years before. That's a huge period of time, and as we've seen from some of the graphs that have been shown earlier today, an awful lot happens in the course of 5 and 10 years in this business, not to say 25. So turning away from the plants themselves to looking at the downstream sector as a whole. You've seen this table before. Mr. Lashley showed this. It shows the distribution of the industries here. LNG is taking most of the gas, methanol and ammonia, the other elements. And the only comment I would make on this is that this is when you're looking at gas export, this as a portfolio makeup makes a lot of sense. There's distribution into the key areas, and it's in proportion to the respective market sizes as well. LNG sells into a global market, which is much larger than those markets of ammonia and ammonia, urea, and methanol. So this picture here shows the flow of gas through upstream to downstream, and you can see you've essentially got 4 major producers, a few others, one dominant producer in BPTT, and the natural gas flows directly from the producers into the Atlantic LNG and through NGC into the downstream, which are the petrochemicals, but also the power sector and so forth. And this is an important element going forward, in as much as NGC is a means of value capture for the state as well. So this chart here then shows how things have changed. We've already seen that the gas sector, the production has declined. The earlier chart I showed the total capacity for production, which is somewhere around 4.2 billion standard cubic feet a day. The production at the moment is somewhat lower than that. And as I showed before, the distribution of gas between the different sectors. This chart here is a time series showing how gas has flowed into the 2 sectors. So we see from 2010 there's been some decline overall. The decline, though, has been more in supply to LNG rather than into NGC. Of course, which as a general trend has been good because there has been historically more value captured in that sector. I made reference earlier to global markets and change in global markets, and the little graphic that I've got on the top right-hand side there shows the gas market history. Gas is a business that is still regional, and we have experienced quite significant differences in pricing in the different region, and that's really captured in this slide here. You can see that for the Asian markets, where we've used Japanese references, we went through a period of extremely high prices through the 2010 to 2014 period, a combination of problems associated in the Far East around the Fukushima disaster, and historically high oil prices as well, dragging this. And more recently, in the last couple of years, we've seen some convergence in pricing. What is also particularly notable about this particular chart is the price in the dark blue there, which is the Henry Hub, i.e. the US reference price, which has declined slowly over time. It's been fairly steady for the last few years. But is substantially lower than in other regions. This is the impact of the shale gas revolution, a plentiful resource base which is being developed rapidly in that country, and has suppressed the pricing. Now, of course, the issue here for LNG is an awful lot of the LNG that was to be produced in this country was targeting this market, which of course is now ceasing to be an LNG market at all. And in fact, most of the projects that were developed to import LNG are now being reversed, and exporting, some of them are already active. So we've seen here quite a change over the last decade in pricing. If we're looking forward, though, we see that the pricing to be less volatile. We see greater supply in the market, a more connectedness in global markets as more LNG comes on, and our forecasts for the pricing going forward is, which you can see in the bottom right-hand side graph, is quite a bit lower. We still expect to see some growth, but we don't expect to see prices returning to where they were in the boom periods. And the last slide that I shall prepare in regard to the general scene setting is just a reference to the ammonia and methanol markets. And again, we show here in this graph the relative prices of ammonia and methanol historically in the top right-hand side, and rather like LNG, they were high through the 2011-2014 period. Again, with ammonia and methanol, there's a strong correlation with oil, which explains a lot of that movement. Subsequently, they have dropped somewhat, and our expectation going forward is a fairly stable price set going forward. So when we are taking our numbers and looking at how we expect value in the future, we are working on this basis. So that really is the background to our analysis on value generation, and Graham now is going to talk more about the specifics of the government take.
Thank you, Graham. This chart basically illustrates, much of which we've heard about earlier this morning. This is the government take from the various parts of the gas value chain. So obviously there's the upstream fiscal take, which we've heard about. There's the government take from the various state companies active in the upstream sector. But also very important, if you look at the midsection of this graphic, is the midstream. There's profit taxes, corporate taxes on NGC in Phoenix Park. There's also the dividends paid by these companies to the government, as we heard from PS Dhanpaul earlier. And also in the downstream, there's the corporation tax paid by the downstream companies, and also the dividends of the government companies active in these sectors. Now, this chart's very complicated, but I think it's important to try and explain how the value flows in the different value chains. So if you look at the top row, this is the methanol sector, and these are generic examples. There are some variations depending on the particular plants. So the upstream license or PSC holder supplies gas to NGC. NGC then sells the gas onto the methanol plant company, and then the plant company, via marketing arrangements, sells the methanol into global methanol markets. Now, the way this net backs is that a price is realised at the exit of the plant in Trinidad, related but lower than international prices. NGC is then paid a gas price related to the methanol price, and then in general, NGC in turn pays a gas price to the upstream, also associated with the methanol prices. Very similar situation for ammonia, which is the second row. Somewhat different for the LNG sector, and here we've got an example of Train 4, which we heard about from Minister Khan earlier. This is a tolling facility. What this means is that the upstream gas suppliers supply gas to the tolling capacity holders, represented by the second row in the chart. These companies then toll the gas through the liquefaction plant, which means the liquefaction plant doesn't take custody, but is just paid a processing fee for turning the gas into LNG. The LNG is then sold, generally speaking, to marketing affiliates of the companies that have the capacity. And this, in Train 4, is sold on a Henry Hub pricing basis with upside on diversions away from the US market, shared between the state and the marketing company. The marketing company itself is free to realise whatever it can offshore Trinidad. Following on from what Minister Khan said earlier, this chart shows, and some of you may be familiar with this from the master plan through 2014, this shows our estimate of netback pricing to the plant inlet in aggregate for the various industries. So you can see that LNG's consistently lagged ammonia and methanol in netback pricing since 2009. And as Graham said, this has been at a time of historically very high pricing in the LNG sector. So if you look at the data that we've looked at, you can see that actually many cargoes, LNG cargoes from Trinidad, were sold in the kind of $10 to $15 per MMBTU, that's per unit of gas, in that 2010 to 2014 period. But if you can look at the chart here, you can see that actually very little of that value flowed back in aggregate to the LNG sector, which even at a peak was only realising a netback price of around $3 per MMBTU. And as we'll talk about a little bit more, it's really the tie-in to the US market which has badly hurt T&T, and as a result, these high global prices have not netted back and been captured by Trinidad and Tobago. This is a similar chart, but what this shows is our estimate of overall government take per unit of upstream gas supplied. So this includes all the aspects I showed in the first chart that I talked about, the take from the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream sectors. But it's a very similar picture. Ammonia has clearly provided the greatest value for T&T over the entire period until 2017, when it was marginally overtaken by methanol. And LNG has significantly lagged the other two main gas consumption industries. So you have a position where LNG consumes more than 50% of T&T's gas, but actually provides the poorest value of the major consuming industries. Now, what we have in this chart is the breakdown of the government take shown on the previous chart. So you can see the dark blue columns, which is the upstream take, the light blue column, which is the NGC profit margin, on the purchase of gas and then the resale of gas to the downstream industries. You have the NGL take from Phoenix Park, and you also have the plant take, which is corporation tax, and also the profit share from the government investments in the various plants. The key point to note from this chart is the role that the NGC profit margin has played in the outperformance of ammonia and methanol over the period. Less so in the lower commodity environment in 2016, 2017, but if you look back to 2014, you can see a huge impact of the NGC profit margin on the overall government take from ammonia, somewhere in the order of $2.50 to $3 per MMBTU. Without that take, the performance of ammonia and methanol would be far more in line with the LNG sector. Now, what can explain the underperformance of the LNG sector at a time of historically high LNG prices? Particularly when, if you look at any generic gas monetization study, they'll usually tell you that LNG is the best option to use for your gas. Well, this chart, again, is very complicated, and I'll try to explain this. On the left-hand side, you have the data per train in unit of gas supply. So that's US dollars per MMBTU. On the right-hand side, you have the aggregates in $1 billion. And what we've tried to show here is the value that was captured in Trinidad and the potential value which was not captured. The dark blue bar shows the base contract prices from the various projects, the various trains, and the light blue bar is the incremental value that was realized under the various commercial arrangements, be it diversion, sharing, or what have you. On top of that, we've made an estimate, which is the orange bar, we've looked at the prices that were realized in the various markets actually supplied, and we've compared that with our own internal databases on the prevailing market prices in those markets, and that's the delta you can see there for the orange bar. And that's, generally speaking, a result of the commercial arrangements that were entered into, whether diversion sharing or downstream sales commitments of the LNG buyers. But you can see that was a very significant piece. In the high markets of 2013, 2014, you were looking at $5+ per MMBTU, and you're still looking in 2017 for some of the trains of the orders of probably $2 or $3 per MMBTU. The lilac bar is our estimate of the value on top of that Trinidad could potentially have captured had the long-term commercial arrangements, which, as Graham said, are an integral part of the LNG business, not been in place. So we've estimated that Trinidad could have potentially captured a Brent oil-linked price of between 11.5% and 12% of Brent FOB, that's to say at Trinidad. And that's the incremental pink bar on top of this, which you can see again was a more significant piece back in 2013-14, but still significant. And the right-hand side, you can see the genesis of the numbers that you were given by Minister Khan earlier. So in 2011 to 2014, we've estimated this potential loss, and I use the word potential, around $6 billion per year. Now, of course, as commodity prices have declined, again, this is a number you heard earlier this morning, this figure now for 2017, we estimate probably in the order of $1.5 billion, but still a significant figure. And to illustrate some of the points made earlier about the US market, this chart illustrates really the nexus of a lot of these issues. And this is again Train 4 as an example. Train 4 started up in late 2005. At that time, Trinidad was not alone. Qatar, Nigeria, all concluded contracts that were tied into the US market. Prior to the shale gas revolution, everybody thought the US was going to be an attractive market for the LNG for the long term. But as you can see on the left-hand side, prices have declined significantly. And on the right-hand side, you can see the supply from Train 4 into the US and non-US markets. So you can see that the US has really ceased to be an appropriate reference market for LNG from Trinidad for basically the last 10 years. You can see there was significant volume into the US in 2007-06, but it's declined significantly since then, and in the last couple of years there's been barely any LNG supplied from Trinidad into the US, but unfortunately from Trinidad's point of view, the pricing is still tied into the US market. Now this chart illustrates our view of what could happen in future under potentially revised contract terms. We're thinking particularly about Train 1 in 2018. You can see here, based on the price projections that Graham put up earlier, we expect ammonia and methanol to continue to outperform the legacy LNG contracts on a net-back price basis to the plant inlet. However, with revised LNG arrangements, we would expect LNG to be the best performer purely in terms of gas netback. And that's represented by the dotted line here. And we've assumed that Trinidad could, at a minimum, capture netback prices from the European market, which is generally now the market of last resort for LNG, but that buyers and off-takers would generally be prepared to pay above this to account for the flexibility and the advantage of that would be afforded to the off-taker. And in our view, it's very important that Trinidad in future realises a transparent LNG market price for its cargoes, which, generally speaking, hasn't been the case hitherto. So to summarise, LNG has consistently lagged behind ammonia and methanol in netback pricing since 2009. Ammonia has also provided the highest government take, with LNG again lagging methanol. It's the NGC profit margin on its gas wholesale activities has been the key to this increased government take. As we've heard, long-term contracts are a key facet of the LNG business, but unfortunately, the long-term contracts tied to the US market have hurt Trinidad badly as the market has moved against it. And as a result, much of the value from higher global LNG markets has not flowed back to Trinidad and Tobago. We don't envisage, unfortunately, a return to the high global commodity prices of 2011 to 2014, but we do believe that with revised terms that work better for TNT, Trinidad could provide, LNG could provide the highest netback prices under revised terms from 2019. Thank you very much.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, you've been provided with what is quite an eye-opening presentation on what has been happening with our depleting resource of gas in Trinidad and Tobago. So as a government, we come in and we're being told that the maximum return has not been achieved on the gas use in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we immediately engaged on doing is understanding what this meant and then having conversations from the highest level of government with our partners, the upstreamers who operate in Trinidad and Tobago, and opening a conversation with them. And to their credit, they have been receptive and they've indicated a willingness to sit at the table with Trinidad and Tobago and renegotiate these contracts. And we will go to the table with them with the right resources to renegotiate contracts which will redound to the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. There's also a downstream industry that we've been engaged in negotiations with, and particularly NGC has been leading negotiations with, because they came in and faced a number of claims as a result of curtailment. One of the points that hasn't been touched on this morning, and I'd just like to put out there before we break for lunch, is that the price of gas, the acquisition cost of gas for NGC, has moved significantly. And the acquisition price of gas for NGC, which they must then sell onwards and downwards to the downstream industry who produce ammonia, methanol, urea, and other commodities, is now at a significantly higher acquisition cost. So in those conversations and discussions now, as we renegotiate and we negotiate new contracts with the downstream industry, you can expect a higher price. Of course, it then ties back into our conversations with the upstreamers, where we're going to be pushing for lower prices. So these are some of the complexities that the government faces, but it has given its commitment, as we've told you, and we have employed what we think are the best possible resources to assist us to make sure we're adequately prepared to be in the room and to carry out these negotiations as we go forward. So we've had a number of presentations here this morning. I think they've been very, very informative. A lot of information has been provided to the country, to the world, and to those that we intend to continue conversations with. At this stage, we'll break for lunch, and before we do so, we'd like to resume promptly at 1, where we'll have a panel discussion. Minister Khan and myself and some other panelists, some of you heard this morning, will then carry on a panel discussion, question and answers for about an hour. And then the conclusion of today would be provided by none other than the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley. And that is what we'll be coming back to after lunch. So if you all can be back at your seats by, let's say 10 to 1, it'd be much appreciated. 2 housekeeping matters I've been asked to raise with you. Please stay at your tables. The Hyatt staff are going to come to the tables and then escort you or tell you when you can proceed to the buffet lunch that's being served. And all of the presentations that were presented this morning will be up on the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries website by the resumption after lunch. So I'd like to thank you all for your time this morning. I hope it was as informative and as good for you as it was for us. And we'll return after lunch for panel discussion. If you just stay seated and we let the first table, the Prime Minister's table, just get up and depart. Thank you very much.